Phil, however, knew. He, who had been in the orphanage for 1 year, knew exactly what such a disappearance could mean. The room downstairs, he had heard stories, whispers in the dark hallways, and had even seen children disappear without leaving a trace. The memories of frightened faces and muffled cries were etched in his mind. He knew that Tali had probably been taken for something sinister. "Anna," Phil murmured one evening while he found himself alone in a corner of the yard. "I think Tali is in the room downstairs. I didn't want to worry you earlier, but I've heard things, rumours about what happens down there." Anna felt a wave of terror wash over her. "What can we do?" Phil looked around to make sure no one was listening to them. "We have to be careful. If we start asking questions, we might disappear too. But I think we need to find a way to access that room and uncover the truth." Anna nodded, determined to save Tali. In the days that followed, Anna and Phil began to develop a plan. They observed the nuns, trying to understand their routine and spot any gaps in their surveillance. Every evening, they met to exchange information and refine their strategy. The atmosphere at the orphanage became increasingly oppressive. The other children seemed to feel the growing tension, and the heavy silence only amplified Anna's fears. But despite the fear, she knew she couldn't abandon Tali. Finally, one night, Anna and Phil decided to act. Taking advantage of the darkness and silence, they slipped out of their beds and headed toward the basement, where the mysterious room was located. Their hearts racing, Anna squeezed Phil's hand, and they descended the dark stairs, ready to face whatever awaited them. Their courage and friendship were their only weapons against the sinister secrets of the orphanage. Anna knew that no matter what happened, she had to uncover the truth and save Tali. Together they hoped to unravel the mystery of the room downstairs and put an end to the terrors haunting the orphanage. The basement was engulfed in oppressive darkness, only faintly illuminated by the dim glow of an oil lamp hanging on a wall. The stone walls dripped with moisture, and the air was heavy, tinged with the smell of mold and something more sinister. Anna and Phil moved cautiously, each step echoing in the silence of the night. Suddenly, they heard a dull sound, like a muffled moan. Phil exchanged a worried glance with Anna before continuing forward, their hands still tightly clasped. Their hands intertwined for courage, they reached a massive wooden door covered with old chains and rusted locks. The sound came from the other side. Phil pulled out a small pair of pliers he had stolen from the orphanage's workshop and began working on the chains. Time seemed to stretch infinitely as they worked in silence, their ears straining for any sound of footsteps from the floors above. Finally, the chains fell to the ground with a dull metallic clank. Phil slowly opened the door, and they were greeted by a terrifying sight. The room was dimly lit by a few flickering candles, and shadows danced on the walls, which were covered with strange symbols. In the centre of the room, Tali was tied to a chair, tears streaming down her pale cheeks. Surrounding her, a circle of nuns, including Sister Matilda, recited prayers in a monotonous and sinister voice. Their eyes closed. They seemed absorbed in a dark ritual. Anna stifled a scream when she saw the other missing children from the manor sitting in tight rows against the walls. Their gazes were empty, their lips murmuring the prayers imposed by the nuns like automatons devoid of free will. Their once familiar faces were now marked by an expression of total submission, the result of a forced docility through cruel methods. Phil, beside her, turned pale. His eyes scanned the faces and he recognized, horrified, several of his former dormitory mates. "George," he murmured, tears in his eyes. George, who had disappeared months ago, was there, staring blankly, chanting prayers like a robot. He was but a shadow of his former self. Then Phil saw Syrah, the always cheerful little girl who had been taken without explanation. Now she sat motionless, murmuring the same prayers, her once radiant smile replaced by a vacant, desperate expression. Her long black hair, once neatly groomed, was now dishevelled, a testament to the horrors she had endured. Kofi, the sharp-witted boy with an easy laugh, was also there. Phil remembered how they had shared stories and laughed together in the rare moments of freedom. Now Kofi seemed broken, his once-alert mind reduced to mechanically following the nuns' orders. Phil clenched his fists, a helpless rage boiling within him. "They did this to everyone who opposed them," he whispered to Anna. "They turned them into empty shells." Anna felt her determination strengthen. She squeezed Tully's hand and then glanced at Phil. "We have to get out of here," she whispered. "We can't let Tully end up like this." Anna couldn't tear her eyes away from Tully. In the centre of the ritual, the nuns sang louder, their voices echoing in the room like a macabre chant. Anna noticed that Tully was trembling, her wrists and ankles tightly bound. The girl's gaze was desperately searching for an escape. Phil squeezed Anna's hand and whispered, "We have to wait for the right moment. When they are distracted enough by their ritual, we can intervene." Heart-pounding, Anna nodded. Minutes passed like hours, then an opportunity presented itself. The nuns, in the ecstasy of their chanting, closed their eyes, becoming even more absorbed in their ritual. This was the moment. Phil and Anna quietly moved toward Tully. Phil began to undo the knots of the ropes while Anna, her hands trembling, kept an eye on the nuns. Sister Matilda, eyes closed, muttered incomprehensible incantations. The other nuns were deep in a trance. Suddenly, Tully's eyes opened and met Anna's. A flash of recognition and relief crossed her gaze. "Anna," she murmured, her voice barely audible above the nuns' chanting. Phil managed to untie the ropes from Tully's wrists. "Come on, let's go," he whispered. The three children started to retreat toward the door, hoping to escape the nuns' attention. But one of the candles flickered and fell, causing the light to waver and catching Sister Matilda's attention. Her eyes opened suddenly and a cry of rage escaped her lips. "Catch them!" she screamed, her eyes burning with fury. Anna, Phil, and Tully rushed out of the room, the nuns hot on their heels. They raced down the stairs and slipped through the dark hallways, their hearts pounding. The nuns' screams echoed behind them, growing dangerously close. Anna cast a quick glance behind her. The threatening silhouettes of the nuns were getting nearer. "Quick, this way," she whispered, leading her friends down a barely lit side corridor. They ran breathlessly, each step echoing like a drumbeat in the oppressive silence of the orphanage. Their ragged breaths and pounding hearts were almost as loud as the cries of the pursuing nuns. Phil, taking the lead, guided them through a maze of corridors he knew well. "This way there's an emergency exit," he murmured, opening a hidden door. They slipped inside and closed the door behind them, holding their breath. They found themselves in a dark room, barely illuminated by the light filtering through a small, dusty window. Anna felt a surge of relief. Hope surged in Anna as she spotted a ladder leading to a ceiling hatch. "Up there, we can get out through the roof," she said, pointing at the ladder. Phil nodded and helped Tully climb up first. "Go ahead, Tully, we're right behind you." Trembling but determined, Tully pulled herself up the ladder, followed by Anna and Phil. They reached the flat roof of the orphanage, where a cold wind greeted them. The nuns' cries were still audible but muffled by the distance and thick walls. "We have to climb down the other side," said Phil, pointing to a sturdy gutter running along the building. One by one they descended the gutter, their hands gripping the cold metal tightly. Once on the ground, they started running across the backyard, heading towards the dark forest that surrounded the orphanage. The moon high in the sky provided just enough light for them to see where they were going. They entered the forest, weaving between the trees, their steps softened by the carpet of dead leaves. The sounds of the pursuit gradually faded, but they knew they had to keep moving. They didn't stop until they were sure they were safe, out of sight and beyond the reach of Sister Matilda and the other cruel nuns. Panting, exhausted but free, they looked at each other with a mix of relief and disbelief. They hid in a dense thicket, their breathing synchronizing with the nocturnal sounds of the forest. Anna, Tully, and Phil knelt behind the bushes, anxiously watching the distant flickers of the nuns' lamps spreading through the dark forest. Sister Matilda's authoritative voice still echoed, ordering the search for the missing children. The three friends huddled together, trying to calm their frantic hearts. "We have to stay quiet," Phil whispered. "They can't find us." Anna put a comforting arm around Tally, who was trembling with fear and exhaustion. "We'll get through this, Tally, I promise." Time passed slowly, each crack of a branch or rustle of leaves sending shivers down their spines. The nuns' lamps swept the forest, their beams piercing the darkness and bringing danger closer. Sister Matilda walked nearby, her severe silhouette outlined in the pale moonlight. "I know they're here somewhere," growled Sister Matilda, her icy voice resonating in the night. "They can't be far. Search everywhere." Phil gently squeezed Anna's shoulder. "We have to move. We can't stay here forever. If she finds us, we're doomed." They began crawling silently, careful to stay in the shadows of the trees. Their movements were slow and deliberate, each step measured to avoid making any noise. Their hearts pounded, but they kept moving, determined to escape the clutches of their pursuers. After what felt like an eternity, they managed to get far enough away that they could no longer see the lights of the lamps. Still on their guard, they straightened up and continued walking, guided by their survival instincts. They eventually found a small stream and decided to follow its course, hoping the water would blur their tracks. The dense forest enveloped them, offering natural protection from their pursuers. They walked for what seemed like hours, their feet soaked and muscles sore, but the adrenaline pushed them to keep going. The soothing murmur of the water guided them, and little by little, the anxiety of the chase faded. Eventually they spotted a clearing through the trees. As they approached, they discovered a wooden cabin nestled in the middle of the forest. Their hearts leapt with hope. They cautiously approached, their senses alert for any sign of danger. To their great surprise, smoke was rising from the chimney, indicating that the cabin was occupied. Anna felt both relieved and anxious. They had no choice but to ask for help, but they didn't know how three terrified children would be received, appearing out of the forest in the middle of the night. They stopped a few meters from the door. "I'll knock," murmured Anna, determined. She stepped forward and gently knocked on the wooden door, her fingers trembling slightly. After a few moments, the door opened, revealing a couple in their 30s. The man, tall and strong, had a kind face, while the woman, small and gentle, looked at them with concern. "For goodness sake, what are you children doing out here?" the man asked, his deep voice resonating in the night. We need help," replied Anna, her voice trembling. "We fled from a terrible place. The nuns. They're cruel. Please help us." The woman stepped closer, her face filled with deep compassion. Come in quickly. You must be freezing and starving," she said. She opened the door wide and gestured for the children to enter. They stepped into the cabin, welcomed by the comforting warmth of the fireplace. The couple seated them on a soft couch, offering blankets and cups of hot chocolate. Comforted by the kindness of Mark and Julie, Anna, Phil and Tally began to tell their story. Anna explained the cruelties they had suffered at the orphanage, Tally's disappearance, the terrifying discovery of the room downstairs, and their desperate flight through the forest. Mark, determined, immediately contacted the police. "The police are on their way. They'll come to get you and deal with the nuns. Everything is going to be okay now." He said this as the children, exhausted but relieved, huddled under the blankets. For the first time in a long while, they felt safe. The fire crackled softly in the fireplace, and Mark and Julie's comforting presence soothed their troubled minds. As the first rays of sunlight broke through the trees, the sound of police sirens could be heard in the distance. The nightmare was coming to an end, and new hope was dawning for Anna, Tally, and Phil. Together they had found the strength to resist and survive, and now they could finally dream of a better future. That day was a macabre ballet. as every parent rushed to retrieve their child. Cries of joy and sobs of relief echoed through the courtyard as the police led the children to their families. Anna, Tali, and Phil watched the scene, their hearts filled with conflicting emotions. They were happy to see the other children reunited with their families, but a tinge of sadness overcame them as they knew they would still have to wait to return to their own homes. Contacted by phone, Mary, the kind housekeeper, hurriedly made her way to the orphanage. When Mary arrived, her eyes filled with tears upon seeing Anna, Tali, and Phil. She hugged them tightly, her sobs mixing with theirs. "Oh, my dear children, I am so relieved to see you safe and sound," she whispered, kissing each of them on the forehead. Every child had been reunited with their family. Akine and Lola, Anna's parents, had cancelled their business trip to be by their daughter's side. They learned to cherish every moment with her and to prioritise her well-being over their various occupations. Mary, Tali, and Phil stayed together a little longer, waiting for the arrangements to be made for their return home. Mary watched over them, surrounding them with all the love and protection they needed. Eventually, Tali and Phil's families were also found. The reunions were full of tears of joy and promises to never let their children return to such a terrible place. The lesson drawn from this story is one of parental responsibility. Akina and Lola understood the importance of being present in their daughter's life. Parents must be the first educators and protectors of their children, ensuring their well-being and development. This story shows that entrusting children to others without vigilance can lead to dangerous and traumatic situations. Courage and determination. Anna, Tali, and Phil displayed incredible courage in facing their fears to escape a dangerous situation. Their determination to protect themselves and their friends is a lesson in bravery for us all. This story reminds us that even in the darkest moments, there is always hope. With courage, friendship, and love, we can overcome challenges and find light at the end of the tunnel. Above all, it teaches the importance of parents being actively involved in their children's education and lives, offering them the love, safety, and values necessary to grow up with peace of mind.